The Linton and Barnstaple Railway is legendary. The Southern Railway's most unusual branch line is remembered by few, but known by many. As the line was coming to a close, one photographer would become known for his written work on the line. L.T. Catchpole. Bromley, in the heart of commuterland, was home for Leslie Catchpole. Even by the 1930s, the railways of Britain were beginning to lose trade as the more affluent turned to road travel. The hustle and bustle of the suburbs resounded to the new sound of the increasingly popular motor vehicles and the sheer power of the Southern Railway's modern schools and King Arthur locomotives. But the glamour engines of the Southern Railway attracted Leslie Catchpole's attention less than the intriguing narrow gauge scene. The family lived comfortably. Friends were entertained by the LTC movies in a mini cinema downstairs at Lyndhurst, the family home. Oakwood pioneer Roger Kidner.
I first met Leslie Catchpole in the Railway Club when I used to help him clear up his gear after giving film shows to the members. We became very friendly and did a number of trips around the Southern Railway where he had shed passes and walking passes obtained from the Southern Railway magazine, for whom he did a lot of photography. In 1934 we decided that it was easier to get around these places if we had a caravan, and he built a caravan using an axle off an old Morris car. After that season, he got down to making a different body which could be taken into three pieces and stowed, and was much easier to put up. The only problem was that his car, which was an old Dodge, only had two-wheel brakes, and with the added weight of the caravan behind, it was sometimes a little bit tricky. However, it was a very splendid motor car and it gave us very good service. We went all over the country. In 1934 we decided to do a tour of Wales. The next year we thought, well, let's do some parts of the southern we haven't seen, so we went down to the West Country and went to Barnstaple. We parked the caravan near the railway, near Snapper Halt in a narrow lane, and I can remember waking up in the morning quite early. It must have been about 6:30 for the first train coming through, and it was a very picturesque sight with the morning mist and this little train just running through the valley. Within months of joining Ben Brothers, that's the firm I worked for, I bought a printing press. I printed various parts of the quarterly magazine Locomotion, which we were then running. And in 1935 we decided that the Linton and Barnstaple Railway needed a book covering it, and that was the first book we really attempted. And we didn't think anybody would bother to buy it, so we only printed 250 copies, which turned out to be a mistake. They were getting the manuscript to the printer, and I was away on business, I think, and Catchpole and Michael Robbins got together and they said, well, what are we going to call this company? And at the moment, at that very time, we were moving from a house at Sidcup called the Oaks to a house called Southwood. So they just said, let's call it Oakwood.
By 1993, L.T. Catchpole's history of the Linton and Barnstaple Railway was enjoying its 15th impression. So why are enthusiasts so interested in this narrow-gauge backwater? Exmoor has maintained for centuries a fine natural wildness in spite of many attempts to violate its lonely expansiveness, and it furnishes, therefore, more ready material for the talents of poet and sportsman than for those of the railway prospector. It was, in fact, one of the last districts of England to adopt the wheeled vehicle, the packhorse and sledge sufficing until the close of the 17th century. Linton and Lynmouth, on the north coast of Devon, were first connected by a public road service in the 1840s. A coach link operated from the Bristol and Exeter station at Bridgewater. In 1854, Barnstaple was reached by the North Devon Railway. The following year, a Bideford extension was opened. 7 years later, the West Somerset Railway inaugurated services to Watchet. By 1874, Torrington, Minehead, Ilfracombe and Barnstaple all benefited from new railways. North Devon was opening up to the tourist market, but the twin villages were missing out. Coach links were inevitably developing. Linton and Lynmouth were now accessible from Minehead, Barnstaple and Ilfracombe. The coach journeys were often slow. The Ilfracombe coach took nearly 3 hours to cover just 18 miles. The only other public services were the paddle steamers, principally from Minehead and Ilfracombe. Unfortunately, the absence of a pier at Lynmouth necessitated passengers disembarking into rowing boats for the last part of the journey. Ships would often take over 2 hours to unload. This farce would have been eliminated had the George Newnes Pier scheme come to fruition. There was an insistent demand for a railway to serve this picturesque area. Several lines were planned. In 1879, the first standard gauge line to Linton was proposed. Between 1885 and 1891, the Filly and Blackmore Gate Railway proposed these routes. It became the Barnstaple and Linton Electric Tramroad Company. Two other schemes are worthy of inclusion. The Great Western favoured a standard gauge route from Filly, and a group of Lintonians proposed a narrow gauge line from Barnstaple, the Linton and Barnstaple Railway. Sir George Newnes joined forces with 3 of Linton's more prosperous inhabitants. Hope Pedder.
He was a very wonderful man here. Well, he was really a fairy godfather, because he gave the town hall, he gave the United Reformed Church, and helped finance the Cliff Railway.
The Cliff Railway was designed and built by Linton builder Bob Jones and hydraulic engineer George Marks. A gauge of 3 feet 9 inches was used for the steepest railway in the world. The gradient is 1 in 1 3/4. Power is provided by a water balance system. The weight of the Lynmouth car is reduced so that the descending car becomes heavier and each car departs. The railway opened on Easter Monday 1890, the same day another George Newnes scheme was inaugurated. Like the Cliff Railway, the electricity generating station used the power of the River Lynn. Only Godalming and Oakhampton were to receive electric street lighting before Linton and Lynmouth. Surprisingly, Sir George didn't actually move to the area until the autumn of 1896. His new home overlooked Lynmouth. The building of Holiday House provided considerable work for the locals. With Sir George's backing, any railway would have received local support. The Linton and Barnstaple Railway was born. Tenders for construction were invited. A gauge of 1 foot 11.5 inches was chosen. It would be based on the successful North Wales narrow gauge routes. Lady Newnes cut the symbolic first sod in September 1895. Construction began in March 1896. Mr. J. Nuttall of Manchester won the contract for construction of the 19-mile, 1 furlong and 5-chain line from Barnstaple to Linton. Unfortunately, some of the local landowners upped their price for the land. Meanwhile, the contractor was suffering from geographical misapprehensions. Mr. Frank W. Chanter, consulting engineer for the L&B, awarded Nuttall an extra £27,000 for additional work. This was against the terms of contract. Court action followed, and the contractor was cast aside as the railway company completed construction. The first train to Linton was hauled by Tor on the 14th of March 1898. 2 days later, Yeo hauled the Press Special. The railway was officially opened on the 11th of May. Hope Pedder's father and his friend travelled on the first public train from Linton.
Well, they were up there to get the first tickets, you see. And when my father's friend bought a single ticket to Barnstaple, but my father bought a return. Well, when they got to Barnstaple, they each had to give up their single tickets, but my father kept his return. Well, when they came back, he didn't want to give up this return ticket, so he jumped out of the train and ran down through the woods and kept his ticket.
The whole of Linton and Lynmouth celebrated the coming of the railway. The road to Holiday House was adorned, "Honour to whom honour is due." The railway settled down to daily operations, but the euphoria of opening soon died down and criticism overshadowed the line. The slow journey time was a particular grievance. In 1923, the Southern Railway took over, bringing investment and a new era to the line. Unfortunately, receipts were poor. Less than 38 years after opening, the Linton and Barnstaple Railway was just a memory. Nearly a century after construction began, enthusiast Paul Gower uncovered another side to the railway's history.
Since 1936, when Leslie Catchpole wrote his book, archive material previously unavailable is now more accessible to the general public. From this material, it has become apparent that the reasons for construction were not necessarily those which the promoters would have us believe. Sir George Newnes and his co-directors, despite being aware of a traffic census commissioned by Linton Town Council in 1895, favoured a narrow gauge route to Barnstaple. The census showed that both Ilfracombe and Minehead were significantly more important than Barnstaple. By road, 5,280 tourists travelled from Minehead, 16,000 from Ilfracombe and 7,000 from Barnstaple. Paddle steamers landed 7,000 people at Lynmouth that year. The people of Linton and Lynmouth had never travelled by train, but Sir George, using his influence, convinced them that Barnstaple, their local capital, would be the correct destination for a railway from Linton. Sir George claimed that all other schemes were bogus, when in fact his was the bogus scheme. Sir George had witnessed the exploitation of Torquay by the Great Western Railway and had come to North Devon for tranquillity. The promotion by the Great Western Railway and others of a standard gauge line from Filly on the Devon and Somerset Railway would, in his eyes, spoil Linton and Lynmouth. The twin villages were ripe for railway development, but it was unlikely that more than one line would be built. Sir George Newnes built the Linton and Barnstaple Railway primarily as a blocking manoeuvre to stop the GWR. It is only when you look at the shortcomings of the L&B that certain questions can be raised. Why was it built to a narrow gauge? Why was it not connected to the Cliff Railway? Why was the Linton terminus at Lynn Bridge? An extension would have brought it within sight of Holiday House. Whichever railway was built, tourists would continue to travel to Linton and Lynmouth. By promoting an impractical railway, the expansion of tourism could be checked, thereby maintaining the exclusivity of the area.
Sir George's plan to keep the twin villages to the select few seems to have succeeded. Only the floods of 1952 prevent many archive photographs from being recreated. But that's another story. Perhaps much of the charm of the Linton and Barnstaple Railway is due to the attractive locomotives Yo, X, Tor, Lin and Lou. Yo was the first of 3 262 tank locomotives ordered on the 24th of October 1896 from Manning Wardle and Company in Leeds. Each locomotive cost £1,100. By December 1897, all were ready for service at Barnstaple. Designed by William W. Lumper, the locomotives featured Joy valve gear. The large cab is misleading. Approximately 1/3 of its length overhangs the boiler, creating something of a smoke trap. The motion inspection hatches were removed at an early stage. The study of early photographs also reveals fish scale polishing. Patterns on the side tanks and cabs were changed regularly so that the management would know if locomotives had not been cleaned. The 5 engines which worked the line were all named after West Country rivers. The River Yo provides the valley through which the Linton and Barnstaple Railway runs as far as Loxhaw, beyond Cheltham. Yo, Manning Wardle number 1361, was employed with and collided with identical sister engine Tor on ballast work before the line actually opened. The River Exe runs from Exhead to Exmouth. The source is approximately 5 miles from Linton, Paracombe and Bratton Fleming. But perhaps the engine owes its name more to Exmoor than the river itself. Before the line opened, X, in store in a stable on the outskirts of Barnstaple, received the attention of unofficial scrap merchants. The engine entered service with a modified ejector pipe which was later replaced. The 1897 engines were all delivered in holly green with a broad black band and orange lining. Below the running plate, a reddish brown predominated. Tor makes up the trio. Barnstaple Town Station was built beside the river, which runs alongside the main line from beyond Eggersford all the way to Barnstaple. Initially, just the Manning Wardle Works numbers were carried on cabside plates. Locomotives were referred to by name. When the Southern Railway took over, Tor became E761. The repaint into Southern livery was undertaken at Pilton Works. The absence of the River Lynn from the initial 3 names was surprising. The East and West Lynn rivers converge on Lynmouth. It was the power of the water from these rivers which devastated Lynmouth in 1952. Sadly, the locomotive which was to sport the name was rarely associated with such power.
Baldwin got into the act because they desperately needed an engine just after the line opened, and there was a engineering strike in England and nobody was able to supply an engine quickly. It used to handle the off-peak service, the off-season service is perfectly all right. I never saw it handling heavy train unless it was double-headed. It was quite frequently double-headed.
Lynn started an American invasion in 1898. The 242 was the first of 91 engines to be imported from the USA in a 2-year period. Other companies who purchased Baldwins were the Great Central, Great Northern and Midland Railways. The Midland also purchased 10 Alcos. By the end of the First World War, few of the American engines remained in service. Lynn was the last to survive. In 1929, Southern livery was applied during a major overhaul at Eastleigh. The purchase of a 242 rather than a 6-coupled machine is thought to have been purely a cost-saving exercise. It was delivered new in kit form to Pilton. It featured inside Stevenson valve gear, bar frames and a wooden cab. A 5th engine was purchased in 1925, named after a river nearly 20 miles south of Barnstaple. The arrival of Lou in late July showed the commitment of the Southern Railway in the L&B. Number E188 was the first locomotive on the line to carry full Southern Railway livery. Lou was basically a copy of the 1897 Manning Wardles, with a few refinements. The company's passenger rolling stock consisted of 16 bogie coaches built by the Bristol Wagon and Carriage Works, and one coach built at Pilton with bodywork by Shapland and Petter of Barnstaple. The terracotta and white livery was soon replaced by the LNWR look, with no crests. 8 of the coaches were observation cars. These offered an excellent view of the engine on up services. But what was the ride like? Blatantly a little rough. The 1913 timetable featured this disclaimer. It may be added that the oscillation experienced when riding on the line is due to the springs under the carriages being placed transversely instead of longitudinally, and not the slightest apprehension of danger need be felt. A case of the L&B blinding its passengers with science? Mrs. J was more than apprehensive after a journey in 1907. We visited Lynmouth today, very wet. Journeyed on Toy Railway, 20 miles in 1.5 hours, oscillation terrible. Mrs. J quite nervous. Train loaded, hardly moved at times. Much love, R.J. Postcards before 1904 offered only a small space for comments. We went here last Friday. I liked the Toy Railway awfully. We liked the Valley of Rocks best, then Watersmeet. Love from GC. But when the temperatures dropped, Kathleen Groves.
And in the winter, they provided people with what was like a big tin can full of hot water to put their feet on, because there is no heating in any of the carriages.
Thankfully, the Southern Railway provided steam heating, a welcome addition to passenger comfort, albeit for only 2 years. The first goods stock was ordered in 1897 from the Bristol Carriage and Wagon Company. The last wagons were purchased in 1927. Despite the company's constant battle to stay solvent, the locomotives and stock were built to an extremely high standard. Slumper went on to improve the L&B locomotive design for the Vale of Rydal. Even the postcard printers noticed similarities. The joy motion was abandoned, the wheelbase shortened, and the rear driving wheels were favoured. In the absence of a Linton and Barnstaple railway locomotive, the Vale of Rydal's 262s are worth more than a second glance. Barnstaple Town Station was once the southern terminus of the Linton and Barnstaple Railway. Trains last called here in 1970 when the standard gauge line to Ilfracombe was closed to passengers. The station was jointly operated with the London and South Western Railway. It replaced the LSWR's Quay Station, a few yards to the east. Town Station opened in 1898, the new narrow gauge line gaining access via Monkey Island, a picturesque though unsavoury piece of land. The buffer stop, formerly on the L&B's run-round loop, remains in situ, but it's been some time since Lynn steamed to Linton. The route of the line has all but disappeared between Town Station and Pilton Depot. The railway ran along the eastern bank of the River Yeo. Braunton Road, then Pilton Causeway were crossed on the level. The course of the line swept across the mini roundabout and through this gateway. The original gate posts have been replaced, but the gate caps retained. The depot was north of the level crossing. A fire engine passes the site. On the night of the 2nd of September 1992, the historic workshops, engine shed and carriage shed were destroyed by fire, and the goods shed was irreparably damaged. Pilton was once the centre of operations of the Linton and Barnstaple Railway. Fireman Ernie Heel was transferred from Bournemouth Shed when Top Link Brighton steam men were moved in after electrification.
We came back from Bournemouth either in the March or the April of 1933. And what struck me about it right away, from coming from a big depot to a little small depot, it was the neatness and the friendliness of everybody you work with. It was most noticeable. You sat on every morning, let's say 6:45. Well, your first call on hour was to read notices. That referred to, say there was relay work, say at Chibnall or Blackfleming, it was printed and you signed your name to it. And it was such a sweet little shed, actually. And the staff of Cyril Shepherd was the fitter, and I believe Chuck Cole Sampson was the fitter's mate. We had a repair book over there. This is the practice. The late-turn driver would book the repairs what will be done. And if there's anything big, the spare engine would come out the next day, and that's what the fire would do their jobs.
X is prepared for service outside the running shed. Even in southern days when better facilities were available elsewhere, all locomotives would receive heavy repairs on site. There was even a spare boiler for the Manning Wardles. The only locomotive to visit Eastleigh Works for attention was Lynn. The workshops were situated at the rear of the locomotive running shed. Pilton was really a self-contained southern outpost.
Mr. Wilfred Bale, the shed master, he put his hand on our shoulder and he congratulated us. He said, "Do you know what?" He said, "My little locos are looking better now than ever since the line been opened." I said, "The better I could lean up over the leg," that's what he'd do. But it was nice to know that it was appreciated. The trouble with places like Linton, it's only summer traffic actually. And if there'd been any industry out there, we used to get an odd coal truck occasionally and one for farmer stuff and that. But if you took it out, loaded up, you brought it back empty, you see.
Pilton was the principal freight centre for general merchandise. The few full wagon loads were exchanged at the transshipment siding near Barnstaple Town Station. But any other goods traffic was brought to Pilton Depot. Messrs Chaplin's Limited would bring all the small goods across town from the Southern Railway Station at Barnstaple Junction. Other goods would transfer from the GWR at Victoria Road. House coal would invariably originate from the Forest of Dean and be landed at Pilton Quay. From there it would be tripped to the depot in all available wagons. The freight and parcels services on the line were certainly unusual. Passenger Izzy Richards.
Oh, they used to stop on the line to put off parcels and things, and people used to come off from the fields on horses and say, "Will you leave this at Linton Station? It'll be picked up and so by so and so."
Well, all trains were mixed as required. None of them were designated as passengers. They were all designated as mixed, but there wasn't always a wagon to go. And sometimes the wagons were picked up at Pilton, or sometimes they were shunted from Pilton to Barnstaple and ended to the train at Barnstaple. The preference was between the engine and the first coach because it improved the driver's view backwards. Didn't always work that way, but it was quite common to find one or two four-wheel trucks between the engine and the first coach. In southern days, a lot of the staff had been elsewhere And at Barnstaple town, it was very much a standard gauge station, and the narrow gauge was regarded almost as an intrusion. There was a lot more traffic on the broad gauge, or standard gauge rather, at Barnstaple town than there was on the narrow, because all the Atlantic Coast Express trains came through and very heavy service to Ilfracombe.
For first-time visitors, changing trains at Barnstaple town could be a bit of a shock, especially if you'd just arrived on the Ace.
I came down on the LNER trains and then onto the Great Western trains and onto the Southern one. And after hours and hours of travelling in these trains and changing everywhere for the journey, I said, I got to Barnstaple. And I asked the porter there, where was the Linton train? He said, there it is, on the other platform. That's the side of your platform. And I looked, I was like, oh, never in this little thing after travelling on the big trains. And I sort of got on it and started off. And I thought, well, I'm never going to arrive anywhere in this.
The first station out was Snapper, opened in 1903. The halts here and at Caffins were not in the original proposal. The rarely photographed Snapper halt is situated just over 2.5 miles from Barnstaple town. The building survives today, but the rhododendrons are starting to engulf this location. A little to the north, near Snapper Mead Farm, an incident occurred on the 6:20 a.m. service from Barnstaple. The rail beneath wagon number 23 tilted outwards, causing it to derail. The train engine and first vehicle continued to Cheltham. Lynn was dispatched from Pilton to meet the passengers from the up train. Approximately 100 people had to change trains in the middle of the Yeo Valley. We are now climbing past Collar Bridge en route to Cheltham. Cheltham Viaduct was the most impressive structure on the line. The crossing of the Stoke Rivers Valley was estimated to cost £6,500, 15% of the £42,100 estimated total cost of construction for the whole route. The structure has stood the test of time. Approximately 250,000 bricks were used during construction. Despite the problems encountered with the contractor, it seems that the quality of workmanship was extremely high. Overlooking the viaduct is Diston Point. This house was once owned by the railway company. Naturally, the steps leading to the gate are original Linton and Barnstaple sleepers. The station has had an extension added, but still retains much of its charm. In the last days, trains passed here at approximately 10:35 a.m, 1:52 p.m. and 4:45 p.m. On the rear of the train are barrels, probably for Woody Bay. The Cheltham siding is on the right. Its position facilitates deliveries from Barnstaple. The locomotive takes water before proceeding northbound. The up train includes returning barrels. Over the years, no passenger suffered death or serious injury whilst riding on the Linton and Barnstaple. But at Chum Hill, 2 members of the Bratton Fleming track gang lost their lives. George Barrow and William H. Welsh, along with 2 other men, were riding towards Cheltham from Bratton on a loaded ballast wagon. Remarkably, the movement was illegal, but the token was in their possession. The falling grade increased the speed of the rolling wagon until it could not be checked by the brake. At Chum Hill, the wagon left the rails and somersaulted down the 20-foot embankment. The accident was attributed to wet leaves on the line, a somewhat doubtful explanation for February. This view shows that the wagon's brake was fully adjusted. It had nothing extra to give. Continuing north, we come to Lancey Brook Viaduct, a particularly inaccessible location. The 8-span bridge was eventually blown up by the army. We are now approaching Bratton Fleming Station, 8 miles out from Barnstaple. This served the largest village en route, and was actually reasonably near to the village which its name suggests it serves. The station building resembles Cheltham. These two stations were actually built by the contractors, whereas the rather grand buildings elsewhere were built by the railway. A passing loop was in use here until 1932. The station is now in use as a private dwelling. A little to the north of Bratton Fleming Station, something stirs in the cutting. Rails have been relaid to 7¼ inch gauge, and steam has returned to the Linton and Barnstaple route. David Moore's Bratton regularly steams up the 1 in 50 towards Linton. "58 years earlier, a film crew from the Southern Railway were recording this scene from the observation car. The concrete area on the left is a sunken water tank. An aqueduct once passed over the line on Bridge 35, but this was diverted into the cutting to serve Bratton Fleming Station with fresh water. The water still flows. Bratton approaches the terminus. David believes that steam passenger trains should return to the route, but they should be faithful to the 2-foot tradition. The area needs a new Linton line. But for now, Bratton offers an opportunity for David and his guests to enjoy a ride up the L&B. A privilege pass. We continue north, the railway clinging to the contours around Bratton Horseshoe, eliminating the need for a viaduct. In the 1960s, part of the railway became a road. The Milk Marketing Board used a section of the original track bed between Narracott and Hunnicott to improve access to farms after a particularly bad winter. An aqueduct once crossed here. An interesting feature on this stretch of line were the rarely photographed aqueducts. Paul Gower.
Fast-flowing moorland streams were carried across the line by means of aqueducts, and here is the one at North Thorn Farm. Originally constructed in wood, they were replaced by the Southern Railway during the early 1920s. In the 58 years since the railway has shut, the river has now assumed its previous course. Another interesting point about this location is the width of the cutting, made far larger than would be required for the passage of a narrow gauge train. This was done so that fill was available to build embankments in the Whistler Pound area.
Much of the track bed in the Whistler Pound area is now submerged beneath the reservoir. X heads for Linton. This is the steepest section of line. Although the ruling grade was 1 in 50, there was insufficient fill obtained from cuttings to smooth out the gradient. The result was a 1 in 29.33. Blackmore Gate was the principal intermediate station, the livestock market offering good freight potential, although in practice this proved not to be the case. The station was positioned at a major crossroads. Initially, the displaced Barnstaple to Linton horse-drawn coach operated from Ilfracombe to connect with the railway. But after one season, it was withdrawn. A train arrives from the south. From the crossroads, Leslie Catchpole recorded this scene of the up train approaching. X departs. Ernie Norman remembers Blackmore Gate Station well, but after a night on the town, his father's memory was hazy.
Returning from Barnstaple, my father got to Blackmore Gate, me being very small, he wanted to go to the toilet. And when he came out from the toilet, unfortunately the train had gone, so I was left on my own. And reaching Linton, fortunately my elder brother was there to meet us. In the meantime, my father walked to Paracombe, and then he went in for another drink, I think, and someone fortunately was there to give him a lift back to Linton.
It's perhaps ironic that Blackmore Gate Station is now a public house. In a field just to the north of Blackmore are 4 concrete posts. The remains of an occupation crossing are likely to be here for a long time. They were cast in situ. Looking north, the view has changed. The bridge is actually still here, but both sides of the cutting have been filled in, and the south wall removed to improve visibility for road users. The line descends towards Paracombe at 1 in 50 before ascending on the same grade. Paracombe landowners did not welcome the railway, so the railway provided minimum facilities, initially just a wooden shelter. In the first year, trains didn't even call at the halt. The village of Paracombe is in fact some distance away. Just to the north of the station is the station, well, an SM32 model of it. Len Wooder's Garden Railway has actually been built on the trackbed of the Linton and Barnstaple. Lou heads for Linton on a mixed train, crossing Lancey Brook Viaduct, then passing through Paracombe Halt. Distinct locations have been chosen to recreate the atmosphere of the line. A model of Len's house is naturally included, positioned just to the north of Paracombe Halt. Throughout the summer, the railway is open to visitors. We close with a view of Cheltham Viaduct. The railway is positioned literally a few yards north of the overbridge at Paracombe Halt. The bridge is still maintained by BR. In the early 1990s, the Halt metamorphosed into a house called the Halt. This was the scene approximately 60 years earlier. Engines often paused for water at Paracombe. It was believed to be the best water supply on the line. Exe tops up before continuing to Woody Bay and Linton. The climb continues to a summit just beyond Woody Bay Station, approximately 1.5 miles from Paragham and 16 miles from Barnstaple. The station here was originally known as Wooder Bay until 1901. The station building was built by Jones Brothers, who were expected to win the contract for construction of the whole line, but lost out to Nuttall's. Woody Bay has an intriguing history.
The land for the station here was given to the railway company by Benjamin Green Lake in return for an agreement that said that he was to have sole right to run a branch line to Woody Bay Pier, which he had constructed 2 miles to the north. The terminus station at Woody Bay proper was to be connected to the pier by means of a cliff railway similar to the one at Linton and Lynmouth. He purchased the 2,950-acre estate at Woody Bay with the intention of turning it into a tourist resort for the well-to-do. At first, he objected to the railway being narrow gauge, but when he realised that the narrow gauge line was all that he was going to get, he threw his lot in with the Linton and Barnstaple. The Act of Parliament relating to the station stated that it should be forever effectively maintained as a station for passenger and goods traffic. However, the Southern Railway Act of 1923 effectively dissolved this act.
It's downhill all the way from this rock cutting to Linton. We've climbed virtually from sea level to 980 feet. In the next 3 miles, the line drops 280 feet. A welcome respite for both locomotive and crew. Caffins for Golf Links is our next stop. As we arrive, golfers prepare to board. This halt was opened in 1906. On a grade of 1 in 50, the site was not a favourable one for train operation. The halt is the only station to disappear. Just to the north at Dean Steep, road improvements have eliminated the bridge on a zigzag bend. The rock cutting was excavated to give the road a more gentle descent. One of the 1897 Manning Wardles heads for Linton. The road descends rapidly to the floor of the valley, while we enjoy the scenery from a ledge about 150 feet above. And, after a curve at Barbrook, Linton Station is spotted briefly as we follow the contour of the hill. Suddenly the station reappears and the brakes are applied for the last time as the train pulls up at the picturesque terminus, 250 feet above the town and 700 feet above sea level. It was known as Linton's invisible terminus. It certainly wasn't visible from Linton. Apparently, it was a carefully selected site, although it was hard to see who benefited from its location, except perhaps the people of Linbridge and, of course, Sir George Newnes. The land beyond here was not available for purchase. The most desirable option would have been a continuation along the hillside, then a long embankment sweeping past the Valley of Rocks and terminating near the Cliff Railway in Linton. From there, visitors could have descended into Lynmouth to the sea. After your disbelief had subsided, you could make your way down the hill, but it was the trip back to the station that was the problem. Kathleen Groves.
I came to Linton in the early 30s from Street in Somerset to the local telephone exchange, and when I had leave I travelled home on the railway. They were always very friendly and cooperative. They never let people miss the train if they were a bit late for it. And because I was off duty at 1 o'clock and had to walk up from Linton to the station, which was uphill all the way, and the train went at 1:10.
The hill must have discouraged rail travel in latter days when buses competed. Steffi Stevens.
I came to Linton in 1932 as an assistant teacher at the village school, and of course there'd have been a taxi to take me to my digs. Summer holidays came. I needed to get to the station, but first I had to conquer this hill.
At the station, a short stretch of railway has been relaid by enthusiast Bill Pryor. Once again, a locomotive is stabled at Linton, but Brunel is unlikely to take out the 12:42 service to Barnstaple. Our timetable affords us only a short time in Linton, for the next train departs at 3:30 and the following one after 6 p.m. The locomotive is already busying itself shunting trucks at the end of the platform. The timetable was the subject of some criticism. Indeed, the first 2 down trains in the morning were rarely well patronised. We returned to Barnstaple with a privilege pass. Pure archive. After passing above Barbrook, the road to Dean Steep can be seen in the valley as the Manning Wardle climbs at 1 in 50. A roadside sign at Dean Steep warns car drivers of the difficult bend as the Yo nears Caffins. The deep rock cutting precedes Woody Bay Station. Yo arrives at Woody Bay. There was little sign of habitation here except for the hotel. The station was built to serve a rising watering place. Unfortunately, the Peter Pan of resorts failed to rise sufficiently or even perceptibly, and the optimism displayed by the company's prospectus remained unfulfilled. We are now approaching Paracombe. To the south of the halt, a massive embankment was built to cross the River Heddon. Much of this was washed away in 1952. At Blackmore Gate, a train arrives from Linton. The short rise preceding the station is virtually the last gradient against up trains. Soon we are descending down the 1 in 50, then 1 in 29 at Whistling Pound, before continuing at around 15 miles per hour past Hunnicutt, the section of line which is now a road. The next station is Bratton Fleming, originally Bratton. This was also the station for nearby Challicum. Station master John Baker sees the train off. During the First World War, an incline was used to draw wagons up from the Bratton Valley to the station. The load was pit props. The geographical misapprehensions mentioned earlier were basically a rock problem. The contractors believed that there was no rock below the surface. The cutting at Chum Hill suggests otherwise. At Cheltham, the crew of X accept the token before continuing over the 112-yard viaduct, 70 feet above the valley. Although the railway was perhaps not the best option offered to Linton, its beauty was undeniable. In a Southern Railway publication, Devon and Cornwall Days, a trip on the railway is immortalised. In no other train have you ever been taken through such excitingly lovely country, or round such Swiss alpine bends. It goes rather slowly with you, for which you are profoundly thankful. Because if it rushed along like its huge mainline colleagues, you wouldn't be able to feast your eyes on the scenery as you were doing. Delightful little stations it stops at too. The bumptious little engine gives a falsetto shriek of pride on approaching and leaving all of them. Perfect. We are now approaching Collar Bridge. A brief stop at Snapper Halt precedes a run beside the meandering Yeo to Pilton and Barnstaple. If the Great Western Route had been built, it would probably have survived until the 1960s. But then, there would never have been a Linton and Barnstaple Railway. During the 1935 summer season, the Southern Railway announced the closure of the Linton and Barnstaple line. The last services would run in September. The Southern Railway had finally given up, but not before a spirited battle. The investment in a fifth locomotive, improvements to carriage stock, overhaul for Lynn, and publicity could not, it seems, repair the defects of a railway which was cursed at birth. The traffic was far too seasonal. The locomotives were unable to take trains of more than 4 coaches, and who wanted to travel just 19 miles in nearly 100 minutes? The SR had tried to operate the railway as just another branch line, but the L&B didn't warrant the investment. In the last 8 years, an operating loss of at least £5,000 per annum was recorded. It had to be closed. The weekend of the 28th and 29th of September proved to be something of a pilgrimage for L&B enthusiasts. LTC and RWK returned.
He went down by car, and on that occasion the only way of getting down to Barnstaple to meet him was to take the night train from Waterloo. By the time I got to Blackmore Gate, it was breakfast time, and after breakfast I fell asleep, not having had any sleep on the train. And I remember that Leslie rode off on a bicycle, which he seemed to have got from somewhere, and took some photographs at Blackmore. He was staying in the Blackmore Gate Hotel.
A diary tells no lies.
Down to the station after supper to chat with the station master. 500 tons of coal to go up next week.
But did the coal ever go to Linton? Even at this late stage, the talk of a reprieve filled the newspapers. Had the Southern Railway overlooked their commitments? On the 29th of September 1935, the platform at Barnstaple town was packed, as around 300 people took the opportunity to travel on the last train. It had been hoped that 2 trains would run, but in the event, one 9-coach double-headed train sufficed. Yo was the train engine and Lou was the pilot. Each member of the crew was given a bronze-coloured chrysanthemum to mark the occasion.
I knew Mrs. Lamford Fatso, but I never knew Mrs. Knight. And then E.S. Moore come along and Inspector Edwards. And Inspector Edwards come and introduced himself. He was a traffic inspector at Southampton. And I wasn't supposed to smoke at that time. Then they brought it in, you could smoke between stations. And he gave us 20 prayer seats. Wally Worth and me was on the O, and Dick Corden and Fetty Worth, which is a nephew of Wally Worth, were on the other one. And I don't know if E.S. Moore went with them, and then Edwards come with us. Me and Wally would have been the people that worked if it only been a 4-carriage train. Pity of it all is this. I only had 3 years privilege of working on the Little Linton line. But poor old Frank Norcombe and the 2 Knott brothers, they'd been there all their life.
Porter-Guard Walkie was an old hand, his family still savour a memento of the last train to Linton, a photograph and a sprig of rosemary. Right away. The train departed at 11:53 a.m., 4 minutes late. The first water stop was at Chelpham. Catchpole and Kidner were waiting up the line.
Whistling Town, just south of Blackmore Gate. It was the most splendid piece of scenery, and it was the obvious place for taking the last train.
In a report of the last journey, Frank Box wrote, "It was near the 11th milepost below Blackmore, we passed at about 15 miles per hour, our author Mr. Catchpole, who was observed busily engaged with his camera. Photographer R.L. Knight was up the signal at Woody Bay. No mean feat with a plate camera. Lou and Yo continue to Linton. The arrival at Linton was at 1:28 p.m. The actual running time was 76 minutes. Lou had been detached just outside the station. But what did the crews do in the next 4.5 hours before departure? Ernie Heel.
We bunked the fire up. And I don't know if Dick and Wally found out, but we walked down to the top of Limmer. And seeing the chief engineer of the Southern Railway was one of the ones that could have stopped us, there wasn't nothing said about it, I don't think. But you're not supposed to leave it in steam unattended.
This was the last view that Leslie Catchpole recorded of an L&B passenger train. Departure was at 7:58 p.m. The Linton Town Band accompanied the train to Blackmore to the sound of The Last Post and Auld Lang Syne. Earlier in the day, the film crew recording the event for the Southern Railway closed up shop at Cheltham. A wreath was laid on the buffer stop at Barnstaple Town. There was still talk of saving the line, but hopes were soon dashed. There was even a mention of a new line from Morthoe to Linton, but that was just wishful thinking. The replacement buses were something of a joke. 20 seats replaced a 4-coach train, and on a bad day the petrol bus would have to be called up. Unfortunately, the vehicle was unable to ascend Dean Steep with passengers. You had to get out and walk. That's progress.
47 years and 3 months I worked for railways. In those 3 years, I suppose it was because of the neatness and the smallness of it, you felt more one of a team than what you did with the passengers.
I'd like to go on it now, and I'd like to see the stations. That's what fascinated me most. There's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stations, little tiny little halts. It seemed as though everybody was trying to get a better one than the other, all the way along the line. It was really beautiful.
My husband and I wouldn't go up. We felt too sad about the closing of it because, well, it was an institution here, you know, and of course they used to run the cars in the summer. You'd get any amount of people here by day and coming to stay here. So it was a great disaster, really, for the place.
I can honestly say, but I'd like the days to come back again. There you are.
On Wednesday the 13th of November 1935, the Linton and Barnstaple Railway was sold at auction. Interestingly, Leslie Catchpole's ticket still read Linton as a destination. Had nobody told Waterloo? Pilton Yard was LTC's destination. It was a depressing spectacle, contrasting sharply with the scenes of activity that had taken place there daily for so many years. On examination, the vehicles were seen to bear certain signs. Lot 4, Lot 8, and so on. The sale commenced at 11 a.m. The first lots, consisting of track work, were withdrawn at 2 shillings a yard. The 2 portable hand jib cranes were sold at £30 and £29 each, and the jib truck made £6 10 shillings. Locomotive Loo made £52, whereas Yo, Tor and Lynn were all sold for £50 each. X was fitted with a steel firebox, so it only reached £34. Cashmore's of Newport purchased every engine except Loo. They were destined to be scrapped.
I was told that they wanted the boiler tubes, which were probably copper, and the rest of it wasn't of very much value. But as going machines, they were of no value at all. Nobody wanted that type of engine. Had they been 4-wheel saddle tanks, for instance, they would have been bought. Well, they were too big for the sort of jobs that might have been found anywhere else. In May 1936, we went down to Barnstaple once again to look at the rolling stock in Pilton Yard, which had not been sold at the sale. There was a surprising amount of it. The engine Loo, which had been assisting with the dismantling, was in the shed and obviously hadn't been cleaned for months. And there was a general atmosphere of gloom about the place. It was, in fact, the last time I ever saw the Linton and Barnstaple as a railway.
All that remained was to lift the track. Vincent Hearn, Nelson Marshall, Edward Spud Thorne, Fernley Hutchings, George Tiger Morgan and Bill Gould lifted the line between Woody Bay and Pilton.
We've got someone now to meet you who you haven't seen since 1936, when you took up the track on the Linton Railway. And if you look to your right, to your left now, I should say, There's Mr. William Gould.
Despite the fact that nearly 60 years have elapsed since they last worked together, Vinnie Hearn and Bill Gould can recall those days vividly.
Right, I understand you gentlemen took up the track from milepost 15.5 to Barnstable back in 1936.
Exactly.
How many were there of you on the crew?
6.
And you're the only two gentlemen still alive today. And how old are you, Mr. Gould?
I'm 88.
And you're?
82 this month.
Can you remember anything about taking the track up?
Oh yes, remember. But you got to think back a bit, haven't you, Bill? I can go from start to finish. Well, I remember all we did, but... was you your one that's relayed it? Relayed it? Yeah. 2 years before us took it up? No, near then, no. Oh, we relayed it right through. And 2 years we took it up again. Yes.
And I understand that you worked for a temporary track relaying gang at Barnstable Junction.
I did.
And the Southern Railway used to lay you off for a couple of weeks a year, so they didn't have to pay you holiday money.
We were 6 picked from the gang, weren't we? That's right, yeah.
Well, that's by Mr. Castle. Or by Josh Daniels.
No, by Josh Daniels, yeah.
Yeah. And they got you specially because you were the best workers, presumably.
Well, must have been,
that's what you'd like to believe, anyway.
Well.
By March 1936, track lifting had progressed to a point just north of Bratton Fleming, where the wrecking crew was seen in action. Once the rails had been loosened, muscle power took over.
They were about a 400 weight each, weren't they? Yeah. We used to push the first lot in on the flat, and we used to turn the rails, and they used to slide in better then. Yeah, upside down. The second lot. And we used to slide them in easy. Well, I think I used to take it in turned up on the stacking the sleepers. We get a lot of sleepers on there. A hell of a lot of sleepers on there. Yeah. Put them in the bottom, see, and then stand them up right.
At an angle.
At an angle.
I see.
Can you remember when the train stopped and all the bloody what it goes come back in the yeah. He stopped. It was like that. Like flew back, and they all come back. And he had to put them all up again.
The locomotive propelled the train all the way from Barnstable. The demolition progressed at a steady pace. Only inclement weather slowed it down. Rain would make the sleepers heavier and working conditions bleak. As the crew were paid for piecework, the good days had to compensate. It's remarkable to see such care during demolition. Mr. S. Castle, a Plymouth shipbreaker, had purchased the track at the auction and was anxious to see a reward for his investment.
We got loaded, really loaded proper. Now you say, oh, come on.
What, knock off at the day and finish?
You should knock us early. I remember he gave us a talk. He said that I put all my money in this. He said, I don't want you lads to let me down.
Spud Thorne was the joker in the pack. Bridge number 10 was the location of this particular stunt. Spud was simply acting out a bet. By late summer, all the track had been recovered as far as Pilton. Lou could now travel on its way to Brazil. Its final job done. The exact whereabouts of the locomotive seemed to have been surrounded in mystery ever since it was lifted from the rails by the Exmouth Junction breakdown crane. An L11 had brought the 20-ton crane to Barnstable transshipment siding. Unfortunately, Lou weighed in at 22 tons, which made life somewhat difficult. The locomotive was also too heavy for the wagon. Lou actually dropped twice during the loading, and on top of that, it is believed the train had a further upset on the bridge over the River Tor. All that remained of the Linton line were the lines connecting the transshipment siding to Pilton Depot. These were eventually taken up by hand with no locomotive present by the summer of 1937. The first track lifting was undertaken by the Southern Railway from Linton to milepost 15.5 immediately after closure. These rails were reused on the Meldon Quarry narrow gauge system. Haywood, another Linton and Barnstable enthusiast, discovered that had the mystery Brazilian known that more of the railway was available, he would have purchased a lot more. Or should we say, several lots more. An N-Class Mogul works in Ilfracombe to Barnstable service. Number 188 was rumoured to have found new work on a coffee plantation. Scrapping was reported in 1957, but over the years, several sightings have supposedly been made. The whereabouts of Lou is one of life's great mysteries. The Manning Wardle departed from Swansea docks in 1936 aboard the Sabor. The ship was sunk in the Second World War by a U-boat. Coaching stock was available at auction, priced between £9 and £13 10 shillings. Coach number 6992 departed for Clanaborough Rectory. It was saved by the church. In 1982, the vehicle was moved to the National Railway Museum. 2 other vehicles were left out on the line. Lot 17, coach 6991, ended its days at Snapper Halt. Coach 6993 was positioned just outside of Snapper. This vehicle is the only Linton and Barnstaple coach still in service. It is now Festiniog coach number 14. Blanche and Linda head for Blano Festiniog. The 8th coach is the former Linton and Barnstaple vehicle. Unfortunately, modifications have been made to make it suitable to run on the line. But if it wasn't for the Festiniog, it would have been lost years ago. In 1993, the Linton and Barnstaple Railway Association discovered another original L&B vehicle. Van number 23 was found in use as a shed near Georgeham. The vehicle will be fully restored and hopefully will once again run on a stretch of the original track bed of the Linton and Barnstaple Railway. Meanwhile, the scenery. Why hasn't someone told you about it? The little foothills, copse covered, the panicky streams hurrying to catch the ebbing tide. Mouse-coloured thatch crowning China, white cottage walls. To the left, the regal gesture of the Devon Hills. To the right, the rugged tableland of Exmoor, the home of the wild red deer. Suddenly, on a stream's bank, a little fence made of the backs of iron bedsteads. This stream is within 6 feet of us, and salmon know it well. We keep on going round corners. Now we're alongside a motor road. Speed merchants smile at us and win. Let them.